Morning everyone. Welcome to this webinar, which is about delivering station development. So this morning we're going to talk about station-led regeneration, and we're going to talk about sort of how do we best deliver that. So who should lead it? What delivery models might work best? The importance of partnership working, engagement with stakeholders and local authorities, and then moving projects from concept to delivery, and some of the challenges and also opportunities that can come with that. I think it's worth saying that delivering station development, it's complex, but it's immensely valuable. I think to our towns and cities, stations drive activity and movement in our urban centres and the places in their own right. So yeah, we can make a lot more out of our stations in a lot of cases, whether that's a greater community asset, sustainable living, centre for employment, and driving a knowledge-driven economy, and all the benefits you get from that in terms of clustering and agglomeration. And we need to work in partnership a lot of the time to do that, just given the complexities. It's multi-agency, it's public and private. We need to bring together land, work with the rail industry, often secure funding, and really take a long-term view. So there's lots of things to look at and explore today. So I'm chairing. My name is Phil White. I work for Arup, so we're a sustainable development consultancy, if you haven't come across us before. And yeah, my background is in lots of work around station regeneration and redevelopment, sort of from King's Cross Station and King's Cross Central, early in my career through York Central, which is a big redevelopment, regeneration programme around York Railway Station, and then more recently Sheffield Station Campus, which is trying to regenerate the area immediately around Sheffield Station, create new development opportunities, employment space, housing, create a new gateway to the station and knit it better into the fabric of the city. So I've had a long-held interest in station redevelopment and regeneration. I enjoy the complexity and working with different partners to make that happen. Yeah, so I'll be chairing, and then I'm joined by two panelists. So we've got Philippa Venables, who's Director of Regeneration and Economy at Walsall Council, and also Dan Coles, who's Director of Member Support and Development at Community Rail Network. And we've had apologies, unfortunately, from Robin Dobson from Network Rail today. So the format for this morning will be each panelist is going to give a brief introduction to themselves, and then going to share a few thoughts. They've got a few slides on their views on this topic and what it means to them. And then we'll go into a Q&A session, so a bit of discussion. So if you've got questions as we go, please put them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll review and moderate those and try and answer those after the speaker panelist presentations. And I should also just say this webinar is being recorded, so if anyone wants to watch it back after, then you're able to. And also, yeah, if there's colleagues that want to watch them, by all means let them know, and they should be able to view it. Okay, so I think that was the introduction, and without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Philippa.
Thank you very much, Phil. Morning, everyone. Very good to be here. So I'm Philippa Venables. I am Director of Regeneration and Economy at Walsall Council. And I'd like to talk to you this morning a bit about how our Walsall narrative in terms of economic development and the overall economic landscape has paved the way for us to be in the fortunate position of having planning for 3 new rail stations in our borough. And in keeping with the topic of the morning about what that means for our various stakeholders. So if we could go on to the slides, please. Thank you. And on to slide 1, please. Thanks. So this is context about Walsall as the sort of case study, if you will. We've been charged by the West Midlands Combined Authority with developing a place-based strategy in the context of Walsall. That's a post-industrial location, changing that landscape into new sustainable urban living, and a real focus on healthy places to live and work. And of course, sustainable transport is front and centre of that, hence it being point 1 of our thematic areas. Looking at locational demand and sector focus, again, we'll be looking at the way rail stations as part of the transport picture can build the place and connect the opportunities that are associated with that, with the modern housing, with town centre living, the overall placemaking and developing, in this case, Walsall's offer. There's a focus on this healthy lifestyle and sustainable transport being a key part of that. And running through this will be the opportunities for all in terms of the end user and in terms of the supplier and business opportunities that come with new rail stations. And all of that feeds into our vision for 2040. Next slide, please. So yes, Walsall is in the middle of £1.5 billion of investment. It's gathering momentum. This slide is about what we've seen come online in the last 15 years, and it's really setting the environment for us to develop our offer, to develop our narrative, and to start ramping up homes and employment land. And of course, in recent years, the work on Junction 10 is that key location, that key transport hub has been ramped up, and we're nearly finished now on the Junction 10 improvements. And as I say, we're in the fortunate position of having the government announcement of 3 new rail stations, which is the real catalyst for developing further our offer in terms of Walsall as a place. Next slide, please. We've done really well in grant funding, and we'll come to talk about what that means in terms of the overall growth zone. But the Future High Street Fund funds a project called Connected Gateway, and again, central tenet being bus and rail integration in a town centre, improving connectivity between our bus station and our rail station, and we have 15 million trips through the town. Obviously, we need to improve our dwell time in the town centre. Having that strong rail and bus offer in the town centre has helped form the argument for the satellite stations that we're getting. We have 2 town deals, and there is a focus on active public spaces and connected spaces. Again, buses, walking, cycling, and again, the framework of the rail network, which we're going to come to. The Levelling Up Fund for the Willenhall Garden City project, that's currently coming online. Phase 1, Moat Street, Villiers Street, 500 houses, but we're looking to 2,000 and more houses in the longer term future. And Willenhall is one of the train stations that we'll be getting. And the Levelling Up Partnership has a focus on healthy places, and that will be based in our town centre, but again will emanate right throughout the borough, throughout the many districts of Walsall, and transport is a key part of linking that up. The Darlaston long-term town plan has now come online. Again, that post-industrial focus on placemaking, strong community focus on that, but it does marry up nicely, and the government focus marries up nicely with the decision to grant Darlaston a long-term plan grant alongside the new rail station to come. Next slide, please. So just in summary, pipeline moving forward, we have a lot of work in train to develop our employment sites, including Spark at Junction 10. Our housing projects, the key one being Willenhall, but lots around the satellite areas of Walsall and, of course, the town centre. So we can see the momentum building and the quantum building. The tenure mix we're hoping will reflect the aspirational place that Walsall is becoming, and the offer that we hope to transmit to employers and to investors. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like geographically, and this is where we begin to see what the train stations will mean to us. The dotted line going out to the west of the diagram is the Walsall growth zone, the Walsall to Willenhall growth corridor, and ultimately the Walsall to Wolverhampton growth corridor. And the opportunities within that the train stations give us are huge. The journey times are massively reduced in between Walsall, Willenhall, Wolverhampton, but also two trains an hour to Birmingham. So obviously having knock-on effects on our strategic housing market area, on our employment reach and journeys to work. So this is how it all fits up with our funding partners. Next slide, please. So looking at our stakeholders, we've mentioned funders. Obviously, the public sector is huge in this. The schemes will be delivered by the West Midlands Rail Executive, but also being as part of a combined authority. The local transport plan is the basis of the single settlement derived from the new devolution deal that we've all been working on. Not so much here, but when we were in Swindon looking at new rail stations, obviously there are lots of funding propositions put to private investors and models worked up to try and attract that investment to make the stations and the station areas surrounding them viable. And it'd be good to talk about those models in the later session. The infrastructure providers, the Spark employment site and the Willenhall Garden City development are catalytic in forming the case for investment in rail stations, and working with James Bridge in bringing forward Willenhall and working with Keepmoat in bringing forward the housing project has been instrumental in providing the best offer around the rail stations that we can. The government stakeholders, obviously the council and the local planning authority. We're looking to policy to have drivers for strengthening our placemakers through rail stations. Regional government, we've talked a little bit about the combined authority and the rail executive. We want to learn some lessons from what's gone before, particularly the impact of the metro in terms of the challenges while construction's happening, but also the opportunities therein. And again, a key focus on improving bus and rail integration and that multimodal transport hub and the multimodal transport picture across our growth zone and our growth corridor. National government, yes, the government have been good enough to bestow us with 3 new stations. Again, looking to policy, the housing white paper did mention sustainable transport as a essential element of development, but it didn't quite make it through to the national policy framework. But it's obviously front and centre of local and regional government policy to strengthen our sustainable transport offer and to integrate it. Next slide, please. And so a few more of our stakeholders. So clearly business is a key one. The traders in the auxiliary trades that may spring up around stations, food and beverage, leisure, etc., but also the businesses that are affected by the current situation and the construction elements. Wider recruitment opportunities really important. Our employers constantly tell us that recruitment is a barrier to them getting the workforce they need, and the new stations and the new routes reducing journey times are going to increase that reach. As a council and as a business community, obviously we want to augment the opportunities through our supply chain to our SMEs and really drive social value by ensuring that we reach all of the business types, all of the business groups possible. Also in terms of skills, which we'll come on to, and parking is always a key bone of contention. Opportunities for car parks, obviously for revenue generation and to serve the stations, but obviously concerns again of our businesses, how that car parking, how that travel plan around the station is going to work. The increased footfall, a great opportunity for our businesses. Communities, as part of our placemaking, as part of our new housing development, we want to serve our existing commuters and again improve the offer so that people will want to live in Walsall, maybe work in Wolverhampton, Birmingham, or in the Black Country, making that Black Country travel zone now much more accessible and much more expedient. Our schools and colleges is a real learning opportunity through that supply chain, through construction, but through the whole lifestyle of station development and then station operation through the planning and construction elements and the lifetime of the station. To drive an employer-led skills strategy, we need to integrate those schools and colleges at an early point. For residents and visitors, obviously the wider user benefits, we want to ensure that all of our communities are consulted, all of our communities are reached and have the opportunity to benefit, whether it be journeys to work, whether it be journeys to education, whether it be access to leisure or travel around the borough. And I know Dan's going to go on to talk about our communities, which will be good to have that conversation. We've touched on the reduced journey times to the work and to the amenities, building the offer of Walsall. It's about leisure as well as about work and about living. And this improved connectivity can only support that. And we want to manage the risk and manage the impact on our communities and on our residents, particularly in terms of noise and light pollution and disruption. Again, that's about lessons learned. It's also about consultation and about sound planning. Landowners running through this, we're constantly in negotiation for land assembly. As the local authority, we're called on to implement CPO. And the financial picture obviously is significant in terms of land value implications and viability when acquiring this land, when it's known that it's for rail stations. So that's where local and regional government obviously play a very key part. I think I've had my time. Sorry if I've gabbled, but there's a lot to say, and as I'm sure you appreciate, we've only just scratched the surface. So thank you very much.
It's great, Philippa. Yeah, thanks very much. It was great to see how it all came together, sort of from policy and economic framework through a spatial framework, with stations being a key part in that and bringing stakeholders with you on the way. Yeah, thanks very much. And Dan, over to you, if that's all right.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, morning everybody. Thank you for having me here today. Just thought I would introduce myself quickly first. My name is Dan Coles. I'm the Director of Member Support and Development at the Community Rail Network. Now, your first question might be, who are the Community Rail Network? So we're the membership organisation for community rail organisations across Britain. Community rail organisations vary massively in their makeup. You may think of the traditional station adopter when you think about community rail, which is the people who look after the stations, but actually it's much broader than that. We represent about 1,200 of those station friends groups. So they really vary from 1 or 2 people at a station to big operations that are looking at how they manage and how they work at their station to improve it for the community. In addition to that, we represent around 75 community rail partnerships, which are a bit what they sound like. They cover a longer line or lines. They look at initiatives in that area. A lot of it is around community engagement, but it's also around making those lines better, improving them for the community, just helping them to get the most from their railways, really. We also work the other way in that we're helping the rail industry to be community focused. So we work very closely with our train operator colleagues, with Network Rail, with the supply chain in certain cases as well, to try and make sure that, in the new world of social value and social impact, to making sure those organisations have a way to speak to the community and have a way to get that insight from the very people who are there on the ground. In regards to stations, Community Rail does lots and lots of things at stations. Now, you've probably seen artwork at stations. Chances are that's been put up by a Community Rail partnership in collaboration with the train operators. That's the thing that we see around lots of stations, making them more welcoming, more colourful, more accessible. But actually, I think the picture is bigger than that. And I'm going to come on to a couple of examples in a moment of community rail partnerships, particularly, who have been looking at how they improve their stations in a much more high profile, much bigger way. And I think one of the things that we're working with lots of our members on at the moment is their aspirations for their stations. Now, we were just talking before we came on today, there's a huge rack of unused and underutilized spaces around Britain's railway stations. There are rooms that have been sat there for 1 year, 5 years, 50 years unused. And we have a lot of our members who have aspirations to use those buildings and to improve the station within that. And I think actually we call on really in lots of our conversations with the DfT, with train operators, with Network Rail, to think about a strategy for how we unlock those buildings. In fact, in the Community Rail Development Strategy, which is the DfT document that was published in 2018, there is lots and lots of detail in there about how the railway should be engaging with community rail on the use of stations and on station buildings particularly. So just a couple of examples I think I wanted to just share of where community rail groups have filled a gap really around station development, whereby there isn't necessarily anything happening in that space, but there's clearly a need for it at stations. Now, Kilmarnock Station Trust have been on the scene, so to speak, for around 10 to 15 years. About 10 years ago, they took part in and led, should I say, a station development of Kilmarnock Station, taking a empty, quiet station. You know, still lots of trains running through, still lots of passengers, but very little in the way of resources, services, stuff happening for passengers. They've taken that on and created a station hub at Kilmarnock. Social Enterprise Cafe, there's a bookshop, there's holistic services for people around massage and mental health, and also bringing in the sustainability element with a cycle hub and things like that. So excellent space. They work with the Railway Heritage Trust with lots of funding, and pull funding in from lots of areas across the funding platforms. Working with the train operator at the time and Network Rail, it was a very long process for them to become. And now that station is now a best in class in terms of how do we build the community into the station. And I think there's something that can be taken from Kilmarnock, and I would encourage you all to have a look at it because there's they've shared lots of their case studies on the internet about how that could factor into both the development of existing stations, but thinking a bit bigger picture about new stations. How do new stations and how do those that are being developed encourage the community to be part of that at the very start rather than as an afterthought later on. So that's Kilmarnock. And then another example, much more, and it's still ongoing, this one at the moment, so things are still happening, is Haltwhistle on the Tyne Valley line, which is a fairly quiet station, let's be honest. Had a couple of buildings on the station that had been sat there empty for a long time, old-fashioned wooden buildings, not the sort that you see a huge amount around the network anymore. The group have taken it on themselves to take on these buildings. It's been a long process, working again across the industry, raising funds from lots of different membership organisations and parties and funding pots. I think the reason this is so important is because actually they've led a change in thinking around the station, around what it can be. They're creating a hub there that's very, very sustainable led. It's very led by the community. So they've solar powered e-bike chargers, they're putting solar panels in. They're very much thinking about the multimodal approach and how do they link the station up with other modes of transport. And again, that's filling a gap where I think the industry are not thinking about that because potentially Haltwhistle is lower on the agenda than lots of other stations. But I think it's very important that we think about all of these stations and how they link into the wider picture of the multimodal approach to transport. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about some of the key principles that we really, really want to talk about when engaging with our members. And we would encourage any station development of any kind to be thinking very early on, whether that's an existing station or a new station, as I say, you're thinking very early on about how you engage with the community and stakeholders. Philip, in her presentation there, talks about lots of the stakeholders that they're engaged with and how they've done that and thinking about that. I think community rail is a real resource in this terms. Now, community rail doesn't cover every line of the country. We will get there eventually, and we'll have a member in every area, hopefully sooner rather than later. But the majority of areas have a community rail representative, whether that's a partnership, a station adopter, or we have some community stations in areas as well. And they can act as eyes and ears, I think, for any station development, and they will have lots of ideas and lots of aspirations for any plan. But I think it's listening to them and thinking about your conversations with them can really inform any development. And we would encourage empowering those members to be part of any discussion about what the station may look like, because they know that station better than anybody else. Let's be honest. They probably know it better than the train operator, certainly, I'm sure, better than Network Rail and local authorities as well. So really, really good resource. So we really encourage you to think about them as partners. And then I think, in terms of, we just touched on it there, about making stations more inclusive, more sustainable. I think you've got your way of doing this through the community rail partnerships and station adopters who use these stations. We would like to see more examples of when there are developments of new stations that community rail is engaged at that stage. We've seen 1 or 2 examples around the country, but it's been fairly limited, to be honest with you. And I think that's something that we're really keen to press. So if anyone has any questions, I'm sure you can pop them in the chat, and we'd like to have a conversation about how we can engage you and any of your developments with more of our members. And they're not slowing coming forward, our members, when they've got a good opinion on what should be happening. And actually, they're a really untapped resource, I think, for lots of these types of projects. So that's just a quick whiz through, I think, of the community rail involvement with station development as it stands at the moment, but really open to having a conversation and any questions that you may have about how you can get involved or how you can get our members involved with your projects.
Great, that's brilliant, Dan. Thanks very much. And yeah,
Thanks, Phil.
Clear there's lots of passion out there in the community, and I think affection perhaps for People's railway stations and kind of the heritage aspect of them. And yeah, I agree. Great to engage with them, and perhaps, as you say, an untapped resource when we're doing these type of regeneration projects. So we'll move into the Q&A. So if anyone has any questions they would like to ask, please put them in the Q&A box. Richard, thanks for yours. I will pose that one shortly. And Philippa, just to give you a heads up, you kind of open yourself up for one, I think, around delivery models to encourage private sector investment. So perhaps we can unpick that one a bit more in a moment. So yeah, question for you, Dan, from Richard was, yeah, great to see the social value realisation at Kilmarnock, which is interested in who drove the trust and how that model can be replicated across the system.
So I think that the main drive initially was around, there was an existing community organisation that operated in the area. They saw a gap. They saw a station there that they had, was part of their patch, so to speak. They saw that there was a gap there, and they saw there was a lot of passengers using the station who, in simple terms, they looked at it initially as a bookshop potentially and a cafe, coffee shop type thing, because there was a gap there, because there was no real retail demand, I guess, would be the consideration. Although if you went to the coffee shop now and saw how many coffees they're selling, you'd say, well, there is a retail demand, absolutely. But yeah, that came out of quite a small acorn of an idea of, we want to use this space and we want to develop something at that station. That's now expanded to taking on lots more of the spaces now. Kilmarnock worked for them because there's quite a lot of spaces within the existing station building. In terms of how that model can be replicated, now obviously station by station basis, it really depends on the setup of the station and space that's available. But I think where there is space available, we have lots of these conversations with our train operator colleagues and with Network Rail. It's about identifying the potential for those buildings that could be used by community rail organisations. And, we've got there's lots of things passing through at the moment. We've just had a building open at Bricket Wood in the south, which has been long gestating and has recently opened in the last 3 to 4 months. But that's a good example. That's now a community-led office meeting space, a community-led cafe. And I think being able to identify those spaces and actually freely engage with the train operator or Network Rail on those is really important, because there are lots of blockers to these happening. Let's be honest. A station building development is not something that's done in 6 months. From an organisation that is, community rail partnerships do have paid members of staff, absolutely, but they're small scale organisations. And anything led by one of those members needs the time and the support from the industry more generally to deliver that.
Great, thanks very much, Dan, and thanks, Richard, for your question. We've got a couple more coming in the Q&A, which is great. Keep them coming. I'm going to turn to you, Philippa, if that's okay. And yeah, just whether you wanted to sort of elaborate a little bit more on your delivery models point and perhaps things you looked at in Swindon and how to encourage private sector investment alongside public sector.
Hi, yes, well, somewhat of a headache in various in various environments, but great opportunity too. I mean, I think I've touched on the land value issue, and I suppose there's a skill in that successful remediation and negotiation and the capturing of the land value uplift to make it into an investable proposition. And in that sense, I suppose it's like any land deal or any development deal. You have to sort of create the right value capture to be investable. I mean, on top of that, I touched on auxiliary buildings and auxiliary facilities. And if you're in the fortunate enough position to have, as often in railway stock, you do have heritage buildings that can be repurposed, for example, that can shoot up the value of a site, especially if you can harness some public sector funding. In Swindon, we weren't obviously delivering a new central rail station in the centre, but doing a land swap and acquiring carriage works from Network Rail, and then turning that into a business incubation centre, for example. It was a huge placemaking initiative that suddenly made the environs of the station investable. So I suppose it's a two-pronged attack. It's either repurposing or creating new build that is investable, whether that be a build to rent or workspace or a residential or mixed use offer, and also being a successful remediator of the land. So that's the approach. It's a complicated cocktail. It's a fascinating and great problem to have. But yes, that's what we'll be looking to drive up value and drive up the opportunities around the stations.
Yeah, and in my experience, it's often about giving the private sector the confidence, isn't it? And also de-risking it, the role of the public sector and de-risking it to the right point for the private market to come in.
Yeah, I suppose it's striking the balance between de-risking it as a public sector organisation and bankrolling it. And I think we've got a lot to learn in the public sector about being a commercial operator. And that's definitely the approach, the way forward.
Yeah. And that point is always moving in time, isn't it? Which is what makes it interesting, I think. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think 2 in a row for you here, Dan. So one from Julian. Thanks, Julian, for the question. So what, Daniel, do you see as the primary differences in opportunity for social investment in new stations as opposed to existing ones?
I think if I answer that and William's question underneath as well, probably in one there, which is it difficult to build in community rail schemes uses into new stations with other competing space requirements? So how do you make the client prioritise these uses over competing interests in a new space? I think the main thing to say is that we're fairly realistic, I think, in that we understand that a new station development is probably not going to have the available space for community use in the traditional sense. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there can be no community rail involvement in the development of that station. Often when a new station is developed, there is community engagement within a local community, whether that's on the actual makeup of the station or the delivery of the work. I've been to lots of those in the past over the years. I think actually engaging with those community rail organisations at that stage to talk about, well, what does the station look like and how can we involve you in the station? And I think actually there's an untapped resource there because new stations, let's be honest, they can sometimes be a little bit identikit. We've seen that, and actually having a involvement from a third party such as that will give you the opportunity, I think, to think about, well, actually, what can we think about? I showed an artwork example there. For example, artwork is something that community rail organisations can do with their eyes closed in a much quicker way than Network Rail or train operators can do. So I think it's about having a conversation, really. And I think that like in Julian's question there, what's the primary difference? I think existing stations, it's much easier because there's much more likely to be that delivery of space. So I think the difference is that an existing station, the project will often be led by those members locally who may have that aspiration. And if they get wind of that there's something happening at the station, you can be sure that they will be on to whoever their contact is to ask those questions. Whereas a new station, I think the engagement needs to come from whoever is developing that station to engage with community rail stakeholders. And I think that has happened. I can think of lots of good examples of developments where there has been engagement, not necessarily at new stations, but new developments within stations, new footbridges and things like that have been installed. There has been lots of engagement with community rail partners. So we just encourage that, I think, for any of those developments. And just that final question from William there about how do you make the client prioritise? I don't think we're really talking about prioritising one over the other. I think it's making sure the two things fit in quite nicely with each other. And, like I said in my presentation, members will know what's happening in that local community, and it might be that you've got a plan for a coffee shop there and they say, well, there's an award-winning one around the corner that you've not noticed, and actually those little bits of inside knowledge can be very useful in developing projects, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I guess that's just picking up on that last point, that's partly about how spaces are let and tenants are procured, isn't it? And
absolutely
looking outside of perhaps the national supply chain to bring in independent.
We would very much encourage that around retail and services provision at stations, because actually we found in our conversations with members that they have a very good relationship with travelling public. Very often, lots of the CRPs have do surveys, they speak to commuters very, very regularly, and they have an understanding of what they want, and it isn't always as simple as wanting a Costa or Starbucks. Quite often there is a demand for something different at the station. So that's just one element, I think, of any development of that kind.
Great, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Julian and William, for your questions. If there's any more questions from anyone else, please post them in the Q&A. In the meantime, there's a couple of bits I thought it might be worth exploring a bit. So just to the panelists. So one thought I had was, often with a lot of these projects, you've got multiple partners, lots of public sector agencies involved a lot of the time, from asset owners to promoters to funders. And I think perhaps that can at times, the project governance can be slightly more complex and takes longer to deliver projects as a result of that. Any thoughts from the panelists on how we could accelerate or smooth delivery of station regeneration projects through those governance processes?
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying there's a complexity there. Network Rail, our friends at Network Rail do have a somewhat complex governance system, and you add a local authority to that, then you potentially do have a complex picture. That said, it's a bit like the investment question. If you're applying a commercial approach and applying a sound project management approach to this, like any other, I think it's just really important to be clear on vision, mission, strategic objectives, customers, stakeholder analysis, focus, and just sort of work through it in a systematic fashion. Now, there are investment gateways and sort of democratic elements that do have to be passed, but I think we're sort of long in the tooth enough now to work that in to any sort of normal program plan. So just say approach it like any other, but be aware of your stakeholders, which is what we're here to talk about. I don't think there's a magic science in it. I think it's about being very pragmatic and about very clear about your objectives.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, it can be partly about the maturity of the relationships you have between partners, and also the understanding each other's objectives from the start, really. Because I think, as you say, Philippa, once that is clear, then you almost can set a framework for governance, can't you? That means you can get decisions made at a higher level rather than continually coming back for the next one and the next one after that. But
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the other thing is, and the thing you've alluded to really, is strong buy-in, and certainly from our side of the fence, if you've got strong political buy-in, then that really helps to address any barriers or any blockages or any hesitations, and some sound strategic conversations between political leaders and commercial leaders often work wonders. So with that buy-in, and again that belief in the vision and that belief in what we're trying to achieve, it does cut through some thorny governance issues at times.
Yeah, agreed. One other bit I was sort of interested in exploring was just perhaps I guess views on ambition and aspiration. So some of the projects we've talked on are, they're kind of a big, the big bold station regeneration projects. And then at the other end of it is the community level projects, which are kind of ambitious and aspirational in their own right. And I guess, do you have any views on sort of, do you think we're being ambitious enough at the moment? As in, if you think about, sort of post HS2 and kind of the landscape, that we now find ourselves in, whether there's sort of a need for us collectively to sort of find our ambition a little bit when it comes to station regeneration and delivery of development around stations.
So on that front, from a community rail perspective, I think we're often talking to our members about lots of them have got good experiences, but lots of them have got bad experiences of delivering these types of projects. And there are certainly aspirational projects that have fallen by the wayside because after 3 or 4 years, the desire has gone, and the blockers that are in place make it difficult for them to deliver. But I think when we're having conversations with our members, we are saying, we're in a changing environment, I think, at the moment, with the way HS2 has gone and potentially GBR, the way that's, if and when that comes. I think we're saying, you need to be thinking about projects and how you deliver them and what you want for your stations as part of and we're trying to build that into the activity planning of all of our CRPs, because actually we think if there's one thing that community rail partnerships should be delivering, it's very much around what is the station environment and why is it like it is. And actually, they have a real hand in changing that. So we're asking our members to think a bit, think of deliverable things, of course, but thinking bigger. And I think there are lots of aspirational projects out there at the moment that we're talking about that are deliverable, but require that bit of buy-in from the industry. And we're certainly seeing that, particularly in different areas. It varies, of course, but we're seeing that sort of buying at some level across different areas.
And I think from our point of view, there's a whole range of ambitions for our end users, and we will be saying to bigger businesses, what will make you relocate your 2,000 strong workforce to Walsall? What will make you keep your etc. Have we been bold enough? Have we reached far enough with our connectivity to get the workforce that you want? And can we upskill them? But in terms of our end users within the communities and our residents, again, this forms part of our wide consultation on the Walsall 2040 strategy. Basically, are you getting from A to B? Can you afford the job you've got? Because are we providing the correct transport to get you there? How is your quality of life? Is our transport network taking you to leisure centres, to libraries, to the theatre, to the areas of natural beauty? And that feeds into a lot of the health, well-being and commercial, industrial and employer and skills elements of our Walsall 2040 strategy. So again, it's being clear about our whole placemaking perspective, and are we being ambitious enough to serve all of those objectives from all of those end users?
Yep, great. Yeah, I think that end user perspective is really important, isn't it? And ultimately that drives the case for everything. Yeah. Great, thanks both. Another question from Julian for Dan. So Dan, do you have any examples of reuse of station buildings working on a commercial basis, i.e. not just charitable endeavours?
Yeah, there's quite a few station developments that are set up as community interest companies, so not necessarily on a charitable basis. I believe, and I could be wrong, that Kilmarnock is set up in that manner as a community interest company. So the money that's made, so to speak, is then reinvested back into the community. There is a good project, and I say this as somebody who worked for Network Rail prior and worked on this project, so which is the Greater Manchester Stations Alliance project, which is looking at underutilised station buildings in collaboration with Northern, TPE, Network Rail and Transport for Greater Manchester, looking at underutilised station buildings. So they've developed 3 buildings, I think, now, Heaton Chapel, Trafford Park and Altrincham, which are all being used and filled by community interest companies in collaboration with the community rail organisation there, so whether a partnership or a station friends group, as is the case at Altrincham. So yeah, there are lots of examples actually where it is part commercial, part community. I can't think of a scenario where it's purely commercial, but then I wouldn't think that would necessarily be community rail in the traditional sense if it was. But there are lots of variables, I think, on how commercial some of these things are. There are some partnerships who've got semi-commercial activities happening, which make them enough money to fund other elements of the CRP and other projects and delivery of other things. So yeah.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Julian, for the question. One from Andrew, slightly more provocative question maybe. So when operational needs conflict with a desire to enhance the local immunity, surely they should take priority. I'm not sure if either Philip or Dan, you want to pick that one up?
Well, I would say that if there is a conflict, surely the priority is resolving the conflict rather than deciding that operational needs take priority. But I understand the question. I think, you know, there are certainly projects have to deliver from an operational perspective, because why else would you deliver that project if it didn't operationally work? I think we're asking that community engagement and enhancing the local amenities, as mentioned there, is part of the process. Now, if we eventually get to the point where we decide, well, we can only deliver it in X way because that, you know, we can't do it any other way, then that's fine. But I think it's making sure that it's part of the conversation at an early stage.
Yes, and as from a local planning authority point of view, one would hope that the local planning framework would err towards accommodating those amenities and hopefully by bypassing that conflict. But of course, at the end of the day, the framework is the framework, and objectors are objectors, and that, as Dan says, that we should be there trying to resolve that conflict. But I would hope that policy would support development of amenities rather than negate it. Yeah,
agreed. And I mean, I think this is it's all about partnership working, isn't it? I guess is the point. So yeah, operational needs of the railway are really important because they underpin the kind of very essence of what it is that presents the other opportunities, whether that's the rail station for community use or the wider regeneration, redevelopment opportunities, all off the back of the rail network. It's then, yeah, kind of balancing that future requirements of the network versus what space can be freed up or repurposed, which yeah, kind of we always need to reach consensus on to establish a project almost to move forward, don't we? So yeah, great. So yeah, thank you for the question, Andrew. So I think if there's no more Q&A or no more Qs, then I'm going to draw this one to a close. So yeah, thanks all very much for joining. Thanks for those who've attended. Thanks to Philippa and Dan for being great panelists, and thanks to Maxine and colleagues at Waterfront for organising. Hope you've all enjoyed it and found it useful and interesting. And I've been asked to mention that if you will look out for the Rail Station Development and Regeneration Event 2024, which is going to be held in London on Tuesday, the 25th of June, hosted by Waterfront. So if you're interested in spending more time on this topic and meeting others in the industry interested in similar things, then have a look out for that. Yep, so thanks all for joining. It's been great sharing. Thanks again to the panelists, and we'll leave it there. Thanks very much, everyone. And goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.